So hello everybody, welcome to this latest webinar on new entrants. My name's Sarah Everett. I head up the farming productivity and innovation teams. Some of you might have been expecting to see Henry today. Unfortunately, he's done himself an injury whilst moving house, so he's not with us today, so I'm stepping into the chair role. This session today, it's a pleasure to welcome John Varley and Clare James from the Clinton Devon estate, who are going to talk to us today about the work they do with new entrants. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Clare and John to give their presentation. And then hopefully there'll be, after their presentation, plenty of opportunity for discussion and questions. I'd ask while the presentation is going on, if you can remain on mute, but feel free to start putting questions into the chat function, and also raise your hand, and then we can come to you once the presentation has finished. So I will hand over to John, who's going to kick us off. Thanks, John.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to say something on one of these sessions. I've been a member of Henry's new entrants group for a few months now, and I was asked. It was an opportunity to give a seminar today. I've asked Clare James, our estate surveyor on the estate, to deliver that. But just by way of introduction, so Clinton Devon Estates is a sort of traditional rural estate, if there is such a thing, back down in Devon, the clue's in the name, and 10,000 hectares, 25,000 acres. I've been here 20 years, which is a remarkably long time. And before that, I used to work for a phone company called BT on the global side and also in UK field operations. So I'm not a chartered surveyor. I had no training in agriculture when I was appointed. And saw things up possibly through a slightly different lens when I joined. Back 20 years ago, we had around about 40 tenant farms. We've always had our own farms. We've got share farms. We've also got had about 40 tenant farms or tenant holdings, because holdings and farms aren't necessarily the same thing. I'm sure you're all aware. It's interesting, over that period of time, we now have 32, and we have amalgamated some with our home farm since they've come up. So in that period, only really 8 holdings have become vacant, and that's an interesting statistic in itself. And most of those have either been amalgamated with the home farm, or more likely amalgamated with existing tenants who need scale and scope to be competitive and productive, or that was the thinking behind it at the time. So it's been very rare for us to have new entrants, and that's been on my mind for a while. And I'm not going to go into the Agricultural Holdings Act and tenure, but somebody who's taking notes might just want to note that one down, because my observation, I've no axe to grind as a chartered surveyor, I just observe it running this business, of which farming forms a part. It's the only feudal bit left on the estate, and therefore it's quite intriguing that nobody's actually looking at it for real reform, because where you have 3-generation tenancies around a specific holding, it does present issues. And I'm not talking specifically from a landlord perspective, because I think going forward, what we need to do is have more interesting partnerships between landlord and tenant, and the opportunity for tenants who've got rights of tenure to be able to collaborate with other tenants and find ways that doesn't break the actual tenancy agreement or the legals behind it all. So there's some work to be done there, and I'm sure some of you on the call are tuned into that. But I really do believe that we need a bit more initiative and innovation. Today's not specifically about that. What I want to really focus on today is how we get new entrants, how, from a landlord's perspective, how we view the opportunity to bring new entrants in. Now, I used to chair something called the Estates Business Group, which is 28 or so of the larger estates in England and Scotland. And just to tell you the facts, that from the position of large estates, we want a thriving tenanted sector. We do. The majority of the larger estates have been around for a long time. Clinton Devon Estates has been around for since 1299, just after the Battle of Falkirk in Scotland with William Wallace, etc. And so our interest in the land sort of goes through is intergenerational. And one of the things that the opportunities we see going forward is this focus on the asset as a soil quality, the environmental benefits, natural capital, and all these aspects fit like a hand in the glove into the majority of responsible landowners wanting to move forward. And that's another reason why tenancies of the future need to embrace some of this stuff. And if I look back at some of the tenancies we've got, agricultural holdings tenancies going back into the past, none of that is referenced at all. And so I do think we've come to a break point with the Agricultural Act, with the Environment Bill, with Climate Change Act, with all departing from European Union. We've come to an interesting break point which presents opportunities for everybody. And for going forward, the traditional transactional relationship between a landlord and a tenant needs to radically shift. Now we're constrained with these particular types of tenure I've mentioned, and now we have the farm business tenancy. So I wanted to bring to your attention a case study of a farm that came back to the estate, or became available for the estate to put on the market, and the story behind that. Because we could have gone out and we could have amalgamated it. We could have done what we've done with all the farms that come back and amalgamated it with an adjoining tenant or gone for the best offer, but we didn't. And I'd like Claire to say a few words about that in a moment. But for me, I think the future for landlord and tenant, this is the one opportunity we've got to really crack some of this new entrant stuff, because I've been on a number of panels and been aware of a number of investigations and reports into new entrants over the last 20 years I've been here at the estate, and everybody's tried their best to do what they can to move it forward, but it's always stumbled. So I think it needs a new initiative with landlords committing to provide land, some of that risk mitigated, and the government and other parties supporting new entrants who may, on the face of it in the past, have been considered a bit of a risk. But in the future, we need to take more risks. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Claire, who's going to talk far more sense than I have for the last 3 minutes. Claire, do you want to take over the reins? Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me and can you see the slides? Can someone let me know?
Yes.
Love. Thank you. So thank you, John, for that introduction. I'm a state surveyor. I've been here 19 years, a little bit behind John, and I have a responsibility within property and land for the agricultural portfolio as well as residential and our beer estate. So I'm just going to run through just a very short number of slides and give you a little bit of a history on where we've come from since the 29th of September 2014, when Martin Williams, third generation farmer, retired from Stantyway Farm, a 265-acre mixed unit sitting on the cliffs in East Devon. Mr. Williams' farm was arable, and his farming practices had provided a habitat for a group of breeding cell buntings. He thought they were a bit of a pain, but we think they're quite special, and they're species on the red list. When the holding became vacant, many opportunities can arise for a landlord. We considered the 3 following opportunities. That would be letting it immediately on the open market. We could let it to a neighbouring estate tenant or take it back in hand. And as John's already said, historically, we've either taken land back in hand or we've amalgamated it to support economies of scale and established businesses, which is the way that agriculture has been going in the last 15 to 20 years. Reletting Stantyway Farm either on the open market or to a tenant without knowing what we had or understood about the holding did not fit with our agricultural strategy. We're also quite excited because this really was the first full holding that we'd had back, particularly in my time on the estate. And I think there was a real opportunity there. It was clear from the initial offers we received from neighbours that we could let the farm for maize to feed the local anaerobic digesters, and the additional bottom line would have benefited the estate by an additional £20,000 per year. Initially seemed quite tempting, but in working through the business case with our environmental partners and our in-hand conservation team, intensive arable agriculture would have severely damaged the breeding habitat of those cell buntings and other farmland wildlife, as well as compromising soil quality and structure. We needed to stop, take stock and understand what we had in order to inform the model for the best agricultural business for the farm and the natural environment. In the short term, we did take the farm back in hand as part of our organic dairy unit and converted the land to the organic status. And over 3 years, we built on our understanding of the farm. Local trusted environmental groups carried out bird and wildlife surveys, recording a baseline data of the farm in a set formulated repeatable process. Our countryside education and conservation teams ran a 24-hour bio-blitz involving over 20 ecologists, 200 local people, and recorded an amazing 800 species. It was citizen science in action. We also decided to test all the soils, not only for nutrient values, but also structure and condition, again formulating a baseline for benchmarking the farm going forward. We understood footfall on the public rights of way network, and particularly the South West Coast Path, and the role the farm had in the local community. All of this information aided an application to Natural England for a countryside stewardship scheme, with cell buntings and pollinators as the key target species. In 2016, as a management team, we'd begun to understand that farm better, more than maybe we'd learned about our other farms on the estate. But we also had an increasing desire to let the farm to a younger farmer, again aligning with our agricultural strategy to support new entrants and progression through the farming industry. And we set ourselves a vision. Stantyway Farm will demonstrate that farming with high conservation standards can be achieved in a sustainable way, benefiting wildlife, landscape and the local community and visitors to the area. At the same time, producing quality agricultural produce which helps support a family farming unit. In terms of finding the right tenant, the estate viewed the tenancy as a partnership, and it was therefore essential that any applicants were committed to the estate's aims of achieving high conservation value and working with the estate to deliver public access and education. Innovation and resilience were likely to be key qualities as the agriculture industry faced new challenges in the post-Brexit era. We held 30 viewings on the holding, promoted primarily by social media. We only did one small advert. The rest was done via social media. It was phenomenal and had nationwide shares. We received 11 tenders, including videos to aid their application. We wanted to see the people in person, and in the end interviewed 4 applicants, each coming with their own unique business model that embraced the vision we set. We also thought a little bit outside the box, and we involved both Natural England and the RSPB in the final selection process. Rent tenders were wide and ranging, and it needs to be said that the selection of Sam and Nell Walker, our chosen tenants, we didn't take the highest rent. We felt, though, that their business model, future plans and diversification ideas needed to be balanced against the level of rent that they offered. So Sam and Nell Walker, their tender was successful, and in a minute I'm going to show you a brief video that we prepared for our Space for Nature launch, and I hope you'll understand why we chose them. But their tender was successful, and we commenced with a 15-year agreement on the 29th of September 2017. Let me just click on the link.
When you see a farm advertised, you always tend to have a look. When you see a farm of this calibre advertised, you go to town on it. We came here on the viewing day and it's stunning. We've got a 15-year tenancy here, so there's every expectation of being able to think long term. It's multi-dimensional, it's got more than just the farming going on here. The farm is situated on the South West Coast Path. An awful lot of walkers come past. They all feel very much that they've got a interest in the farm. It's their farm. They like looking over the gates and seeing what's happening. We've got the easternmost breeding site of cell buntings in the UK, and correspondingly a fairly comprehensive high-tier stewardship scheme to protect them. You couldn't actually put together a budget that would show you could have a profitable farming system and meet all the organic objectives and look after all the wildlife, but you can. I'm sure you can. And I think, you know, these things can work together. There's no need to have this Do we have natural capital or do we have commodity food production? Natural capital and the environment is not ring fenced in a little corner of your farm. It's all around you. It's what you're doing. It's what you work with every day. On a farm like this, and let's be clear, this is a fairly special farm. On a farm like this, there are very few contradictions. Cattle are essential here to increase the levels of organic matter in the soil. If you get the soil right, if you put dung in the soil and you get the soil microbes right, you get all that sort of microfauna going, then you get the sort of slightly bigger soil life going, you get earthworms, and then you get improved bird life, and everything comes up together. Even growing a decent crop of barley has got to be better for the soil buntings foraging in the barley than growing a poor crop. So all of that comes up from sort of long-term custodianship, looking after the soil. And my next target is to really work on the organic matter levels, which will take a long time. We were looking for a landlord who thinks long-term, and Clinton Devon Estates very much thinks in the long term. For everyone, for the estate, for the tenants, for the natural capital and the wildlife and everything else. Nothing happens overnight. You've got to farm like you're going to live forever, as they say, and live like you're going to die tomorrow. We do feel very lucky, very privileged to be here, but we realise that we have to work for it.
So I hope that gave you a little capture of what we saw in Sam and Nell, and reflecting, as I have done in preparation for this meeting, back over the last 3 years, we've got a long-term tenancy, which is really important. But more than that, we've actually got a partnership and a farm that's being run with our vision in mind, and the future of the cell bunting, which you see before you, that is definitely secured, and the numbers are moving forward. We've we've had our 3-year rent review. We didn't do a rent review, but we did a review and a reflection with them, and we're coming up to the 5-year baseline survey next year. So we're starting to relook at soil sampling and looking at the transects we did for birds and butterflies to see if the farm is moving on from that baseline data. As well as that, we also have a forward-thinking family who've developed a holiday lettings business. If you fancy a nice retreat on the cliff tops above Devon, go to the link at Santaway Farm. We've developed with them the Brandyhead observation post. They've also got an honesty cafe and also partner with us to sell beef grazed on our Pebblebed Heath. But we also have a holding that we know and understand, and that's benchmarked and monitored, as I've said, to ensure that the improvement to its natural capital continues. And we've since then replicated this model on 4 new tenancies to ensure that we continue to know and understand have and how that natural capital can be enhanced to support viable and productive agricultural businesses. I think John will agree that we're excited that we have these new relationships and conversations, and even where we've done these 4 other successions, we are definitely having those conversations with the younger generation. I think it's in everyone's interest, isn't it, as we head into these uncertain but also exciting times. Thank you very much, and we look forward to taking your questions.
Thanks very much. That was a fascinating presentation, and it's funny you should mention cell buntings. It made me think about when I was at primary school, and actually we had a project where we had to go and search for cell buntings on the primary school estate. So I had spent many a happy hour sitting in a mobile classroom looking out for cell buntings on the school field. So please do start raising your hands or put questions into the chat for John and Claire. I think there's already one question in there already, which is actually directed at me rather than John and Claire. These sessions are really about questions for our speakers, but just to address the question in brief about the definition of a new entrant, it is one of the things that we're currently looking at, and we don't have a firm answer yet as to what the definition of a new entrant needs to be. It's when you start unpeeling the layers of that question, there's lots of different things to consider. But please do come forward with questions now. I don't know whether you want to unshare your screen, Claire. Yeah. I think I can see myself 2 or 3 times on the screen, which is slightly disconcerting. Okay, so I can see.
Sarah, sorry, one thing I did miss, we didn't actually say, Sam and Nell weren't necessarily new entrants,
No.
but they had been tenants of the Devon County small holdings. So they had been with Devon County, I think, for about 5 years, but had come in as new entrants into that, and then used the system that's meant to be there with the county small holdings to move up through into a slightly bigger farm. So I think that's probably important. They weren't necessarily new entrants, but they were very much on the start of their farming career.
Brilliant, thanks. Oliver, you've got your hand up. Do you want to introduce yourself as well when you ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. So Oliver Maxey, I head up the agricultural division in the south of the country for Virgin Money. And my, well, first of all, my observation is that farm looks a super farm, and any farm that runs up to the coast is quite idyllic, and I'm sure they'll be very happy there as tenants. That's great to see. But the question is, the carbon neutral agenda is moving quite quickly. You know, we've got in agriculture a target of 2040. If you look at the buyers of farm produce, you know, they're moving it at a fast pace, you know, wanting to get carbon neutral beef in a few years and eggs in a few years and so on. So my question is around that. What's the estate doing itself to get itself in a carbon neutral position? And then in conjunction with that, what is it doing for or with its tenants to assist them in getting themselves into a carbon neutral position so that your produce is desirable by the buyers, is my question.
Shall I just say a few words? Claire might want to come in and contradict me in a moment. So what's the estate doing? I mean, everybody's on the bandwagon, aren't they? Every organisation is saying they you know, carbon neutral target by X. So we had our 2021 strategy, 2011-2021 strategy, which came to an end this year. So we're now working on our 2030 strategy, which, surprise, surprise, one of the 15 ambitions we have is to be net zero by 2030 across the estate. And we are unpacking that to understand what that means. And the first thing you've got to do is measure everything. And that's what we're doing. So we're doing a natural capital analysis, working with an offshoot of the Oxford University, doing a bit of work around the edge. We're working with the West Country Rivers Trust on about 20 farms across the estate, looking at soil structure, carbon and such like. We've done an in-depth survey of our home farm, a 2,000 acre organic dairy that Claire mentioned earlier. It's interesting when the analysis of the home farm, the home dairy, is, I don't have the figures to hand, but because it's an organic dairy, it is pumping into the atmosphere far more greenhouse gases than we can actually absorb on the farm itself. Luckily, we've got 17% forest cover, and we're looking to increase that to 25% in the next 10 years over the period of the plan. But that only goes so far. So what are we doing? Well, we're actually measuring everything. We're looking at the dilemmas and the ambiguities of what all this means. We're measuring, our vehicle fleet moving to electric, but you can't move tractors electric. Can we go to biodiesel? We tried that a few years ago, didn't quite work out. So we are on that journey, and we very much are putting into place various initiatives and being able to measure the changes we're making. With regard to our tenants and the wider farming, I think there's some real challenges for farming generally across the country becoming carbon neutral. And whilst you say customers are wanting to buy things which have come from a carbon neutral value chain, I think farming is going to struggle itself to have the technologies and the ability within a single farm to be able to offset or indeed remove carbon emitting practices. But we're on that journey.
Thank you.
So I can't hear.
Yes, sorry, hit the mute button. David, I see you've put a question in the chat. Do you want to ask and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. My name's David Ratcliffe. I'm a dairy and beef farmer in Gloucestershire and also chair the NFU Next Generation Forum. Obviously, we all know lots of new entrants have huge amount of enthusiasm. and are brilliant to the industry, but obviously can be seen as higher risk by some private landlords. Just advice really from you both. How do you think we can get private landlords almost together in a room and try and encourage them to really get them to when they have a farm come up, really think about considering a new entrant rather than obviously the best tender or amalgamating a farm? Any advice would be gratefully received.
Well, Claire, can I just say something, Claire? I'm sorry to hog it. And then Claire, have a think about what you're going to say, your answer. Can I just say, David, absolutely. So Sarah will be aware that I sort of only spouting whales got harpoons. So I've raised this point with Lord Curry, who you may be aware of in the House, who's in the House of Lords, who just happens to be one of our trustees. About getting us maybe 20, 30 larger landowners in the country, not just private, but institutional, charitable, and to make a commitment, the sort of thing the Prince of Wales orchestrates, get them all in a chief executives in a room and sign a flip chart, and Bob's your uncle. So what we're trying to initiate, and it was received in a mixed way, but I'm still pursuing it, is to get 10, 20 larger landowners to sign that flip chart, which says over the next 10 years, 5 to 10 years, it's fairly clear that a number of farms are going to come up. Each of those estates or landowners will commit that they once DEF has worked out what new entrant is, will commit to giving a plot of land or offering a plot of land, a farm, to the new entrant. But it's not just a case of landlords and tenants, because we consider new entrants. The definition is really important. A new entrant, it can be the sort of person that Sam was. It could be the sort of person you just described, David, coming out of college or whatever. It could be somebody from left field. And I think it should be all those things, but it should be underpinned by training, by skills, by CPD. We don't have to have lots of chartered farmers, but we do, I think, need the colleges, the agricultural colleges, to be supported, and there's an opportunity for government to link in with that and support the scheme I've just described with education and training, and not just pump somebody out with a certificate, but to actually sit with them during the formative years of their farming career with a landlord, and that would give the landlord some comfort that there was some support. It's not just landlords looking for tax breaks, it's looking for a new entrant who is supported by some mechanism. Equally, Virgin Money, Barclays Bank, HSBC, maybe the banks could also look at supporting this particular scheme, because at the end of the day, we're going into the unknown a little bit. It's a volatile world, a lot of uncertainty, and it's about risk. And landowners need to recognise that they need to take a few risks, perhaps more risks than they've done before, because the whole platform on which we operate in agriculture and land management is shifting and changing. And therefore, everybody needs to take a bit of a risk. And the new entrants are taking a bit of a risk. But I think banks, the Department of Education should be in on the new entrant scheme, supporting further education and training for farmers to take some of the risk away. The agricultural colleges themselves need a bit of a oomph, in my view, to get behind some of this, and also perhaps the end purchasers of these products down the value chain, the supermarkets and others, and those supplying, if they are non-organic, inputs to farms, need to be part of the scheme. And I think there's a whole range of opportunities, but it's not just about landlords, but landlords could make a big difference. Claire, anything you want to say on the back of that?
No, I think just reiterating what John said in terms of what we experienced through Stanty Way, I would say we had two or three people who were new entrants. One or two were potentially new entrants, but had a massive farming family behind them. I have to say that made us question the real motivation behind why they wanted that particular farm. We might have seen ourselves with lots of maize being grown, but the others, possibly it was in their preparation and that sort of mentoring structure. And I know that young farmers do an awful lot to prepare new entrants, but I think having a real understanding and training of budgets and legislation and really what's expected, and I think that's where landowners can be slightly nervous. But I'm going to pull on, there was a question in, if that's okay, Sarah, jumping ahead about where do we see the future role of council farms?
Yep.
We were party, Devon County still have their council farm structure, and we were part of a consultation about 10 years or so ago. Time goes by, doesn't it? I can't remember when they did it, it's quite some time ago. And we really supported the value of it. And Devon County at the moment still do see the value in them. And I think maybe that's where there's opportunities, if there are that sort of institutional arrangement that could then maybe lead into the private sector, giving an opportunity for tenants to grow within quite a small, safe business environment, and then being able to move up through the ladder, and that might then facilitate the changes. But we also, obviously, as John's alluded to, need to look at legislation, because unfortunately there's a bit of a glass ceiling, isn't there? You can't then move on because people don't leave. But that's a different conversation. But we definitely on the estate support and see a real future, I think, in the council farm estate, if they can also have the flexibility of moving tenants around onto other of their own farms and amalgamating as well, and allowing people to grow on and develop. Okay. Sorry, Sarah, if I then took over that question.
No, that's great. Does that answer your question, Graham, around council farms?
Yeah, it's really helpful, Claire. I welcome that comment. We're working on a vision for county farm estates, and really think what role they could play in the future. So this is really helpful. I wonder, because you've talked about amalgamating and having to amalgamate in the state, whether, given John's point earlier on about economics of scale and productivity, whether you would see a reason to suggest that you could split, given there are models of smaller scale horticulture, or there might be very specialist models that work at a smaller scale and could be productive and add value in different ways to be viable, whether you see that as possible, or is it just implausible?
I think in terms of I can't comment on the county farm structure. I know we've got one farm on our own. We lease 3 farms to the Devon county farms, and there's one farm that we've done something with them to facilitate adding some more land to support a dairy business. But I think in terms of the estate, I would like us to start splitting some of our units. I think there's a real opportunity where you've got one barn and, I don't know, 50 acres or so, that you could let that sort of smaller area again. And I think there are some exciting opportunities to be had. And I think we need to be braver about it. And I think we certainly haven't been, but I think there are lots of new horticultural opportunities, definitely, that need exploring.
Those I'd love to talk more. Sorry, John. Yeah.
Just on that. Sorry, Graham. Wish you well with your strategy. Just my observation is, it's about looking beyond the county farm. You can't have a strategy for county farms without the context in which county farms operate. And there's something about what is land for. And if you look across the country, look across England, you've got various types of catchment, you've got various types of land, more suitable for this, more suitable for that. So I had the chief executive of a large county we're in, I won't mention his name or the county, but we'll call it Clinton Devon Estates, in my office 3 years ago. And I said, what's on your mind, Phil? And he said, social services, tourism, something else. I said, well, hang on a minute. We're leaving the European Union in 3 years or whatever it was. What about agriculture, which represents the backcloth of the whole of this county? What's it for in your plan? And I showed him some slides I'd written. He said, can I have a copy of those? Anyway, so I think, and Phil is a great guy. Phil, the chief executive of Devon County Council, brilliant, is a great guy. But I think it's understanding these counties, how does the farm, how does agriculture and how does land fit in with the local authorities' plans? And then if the county farms need to have a strategy, which they do, then who are you working with and who else has got land and what is that land best used for? So it's a bigger picture, and it's understanding. So if the county farm is going to work, they're going to have some relationships with the other farmers and landowners in the particular catchment or region or county or beyond counties or on the boundary of counties if it's going to work. And therefore, that to me is fundamental. And the opportunities with the new schemes that are being developed, assuming there's some money from the Treasury, is that we're looking at there's more money if you are looking at greater landscape scale activity. And that's where the county farms could work with private sector, charitable institutional sector to deliver stuff. So I just think that's what needs to happen.
Thanks, John. That's in our vision. So I'd be delighted to share that with you in the future. So that's really well met. Thank you.
Sorry, Sarah.
Thanks, no, thanks very much for that. I think, Becky, you've got a question that actually follows on, I think, from what John was just talking about. Do you want to introduce yourself and ask that one?
Yes, hi there. Becky Hughes. I work for Cornwall Council in the Environmental Growth Department. I've been up to Clinton, Devon before when I was working with FWAG and with CFE, so I've had insights into what you've done before. And yeah, it's really nicely queued up there, actually. It's almost like it was planned. I'd just be interested to know, we're obviously on a bit of a crux at the moment, things are changing in terms of these schemes. What's your feeling about how these future schemes are going to work, and how much will you be relying on the future schemes to deliver what you want your tenants to be doing in the estate, the direction in which your estate hopes to go? And how much will you just rely on kind of good practice in the relationship with your tenants? So in the past, it was almost kind of, going into an ELS or an HLS was taken pretty much for granted, or it was much easier than it might be in the future. So I'd just like to know what your thoughts on the future schemes are and how useful they will be to you.
Claire, do you want to talk about tests and trials? Are you cited on that?
Yes, I am. So so we, as an estate, have got 2 pilot schemes for, or the trials for the Elms scheme at the moment. We're just coming to the end of that project, putting our report forward to DEFRA, hoping to go for a pilot scheme. We've got probably about 12 of our tenants also as part of that who have fed into that. They find it very frustrating because there's not any outcomes other than the report at the moment, but they are fully on board and really excited about what they can offer over and above what they already do. They understand, I think, that obviously that going forward without Brexit, the public money for public good, they are going to have to do this stuff in order to gain some funding. And we are really encouraged that the conversations we've been having with them over the last 5 years are beginning to sink in, and that they're willing to work with us. We are not draconian landlords, and we appreciate that all the farmers run their businesses with their own autonomy. But what we were increasingly finding, so we've never told people they have to go into any kind of stewardship scheme. We view that as best practice. We view that they ought to be doing it. We've got many tenants who don't, but actually farm with that still at heart. They still do quite a lot, but they don't go into a scheme because they don't want the paperwork. But in terms of what we are starting to put inside our tenancy agreements, it's because it's really difficult when you're sitting at a table with someone who's farmed for their succession on their first, second succession, and you're saying the farm's not in good heart, but you've got no baseline from when dad or granddad took it on. So that's what we're trying to do, particularly with the successions that we've just done and Stantyway. It'd be lovely if that tenancy ran beyond its term and we had a renewal, but we want to be able to know that that farm is in better heart under the tenancy. There's no obligation for it to be much better. There's no set target, but it mustn't be worse at each 5-year review. And I think that's really important. All this, we've tried to go to court with tenants previously on good agricultural practice, and it's really hard to prove. And actually what we wanted was to be able to have some real decisions. And if you're saying to someone, please don't grow maize under plastic, or please don't spread this on the land, or please don't crop like this, if you've got no baseline data to support your argument, it makes those conversations really difficult. So we're not being prescriptive within our agreements in terms of going into stewardship, but likewise we are encouraging and wanting to work in partnership, and Elms has definitely proved that for us in the work we've done so far. John, I don't know if you want to add.
Claire, thank you, Claire. I think you've said most of it. Just one thing to add, Becky, was, you know, we talk about the Elms tests and trials we're doing is over a landscape, a catchment, and it's been fascinating to see everybody, you know, after Foot and Mouth 2001, I sent a letter to all farm tenants, said, come to the office, let's talk about the future. There's been a big break point happened in agriculture. And we had 3 replies. Out of the number 40 farms, we had 3 replies. It was the 3 usual suspects who are doing everything right, really forward looking. So they came to the office and we had a chat. Lack of interest was amazing. With the leaving the European Union, we sent a similar letter out saying, come to we're going to get Lord Coe and a few other people in the room to have a chat about the future. It was packed. In fact, please turn the recording off. We breached the fire safety regulations in the boardroom because of the number of people who turned up, wanting to work together and understand what was going on. And we had presentations from our head of conservation, who's the ecologist, and Lord Curry and a whole range of other people, absolutely desperate for information. And the test and trial came from after that. And what it's about from a landowner's perspective, land manager's perspective with a number of tenants, going forward, what can we do? What do we want? We don't want to be prescriptive, but we can help facilitate some of these schemes on a landscape scale. So a catchment, for example, water quality doesn't just come out of one farm, you know, plus or minus, you know, all farms contribute diffuse pollution or not, as the case may be, air quality, soil quality, runoff, blah, blah, blah. Massive opportunities to work in collaboration, and the landlord or landowner has an opportunity to help facilitate. Does the landowner have the capacity to facilitate it? Question mark. And that's something that I'm sure DEFRA are onto at the moment, but it's something to think about. But that is a potential role for that, or subcontract it to another body like the Southwest Rivers Trust we're using down here to help us with the test and trials. That's the opportunity as well. And I think a landowner feeling that sort of collaboration and facilitation is going on would feel happy about, you know, more landscape scale benefits at the end of the day, because most landowners, if they're in the tenancy business, have got more than one tenant.
Yeah, that's really helpful, thank you. And I think, yeah, particularly that facilitation role and things, if, you know, new entrants and who maybe haven't been through an agri-environment scheme before are kind of wavering, not sure whether to kind of jump and to go into the SFI or whatever, just having that, you know, the landowner with the encouragement and the support, but without going so far as to say, well, actually, no, you have to do that. That can be enough, you know, hopefully to, yeah, get people going in the right direction. And, you know, a positive narrative around the future schemes and real encouragement would be really helpful, because it doesn't seem, from my perspective, DEFRA in the past haven't, you know, really been influential in encouraging new people to get onto it. It's been, you know, they've been rather passive, I think. So that positive help from the landowner is really important, I think.
Professor Deezer Helm, who's like Marmite, I actually quite like him, but he's not loved by everybody. But he's got some quite clear views about stuff. You know, he wants it all to be a competition. And it's interesting, I was involved in the nature improvement areas back in 2011. There was about 15 million quid, and there was a competition. We had looking for 12 10,000 hectare groupings to look at improving nature across landscapes. And the Marlborough farmers were probably the only farming-based group that put their hand up. Well, they weren't the only one to put the hand up, but the only one that was selected out of the 12. And a fascinating case study, and it still goes on today. But the fundamental challenge they had was the facilitation, the project management of it. Because you know, these 12 farmers, well, these farmers in Marlborough Downs wasn't 12 farmers, I don't know how many farmers it was, but it was more than about 4, 5, 6. You know, they've got a day job to do rather than coordinate everybody else. And there wasn't one landowner, really, there's numbers. So it's even more complicated than what we're trying to do at Clinton Devon. So that facilitation, that project management role to really get bangs for the bucks and help train, educate. You know, I talk about the scheme, I mentioned to David about getting the Agricultural College to step up, Department of Education to put some funding in. I'm not talking about a GCSE in agriculture, I'm talking about something a little bit more thoughtful than that. And you know, provide ongoing support. All that needs some kind of project management, and I hope that the government's going to put some money into that to drive things through, because the Marlborough farmers wobbled for quite a bit of time, and it was their one big gripe for the first year or so of the project.
Yeah, thanks. It's really interesting.
Thanks very much. Sue, I see you've put a comment in the chat, and there wasn't a particular question related to that, but I wondered if you wanted to say something there.
Yeah, hi, thanks for letting me in. It was a comment really rather than a question, and regeneration of farms is something Addington's trying to help with for the last 18 years. But as I said in my chat, invariably any tenant or most tenants that we help with housing once they've left the farm, they tell us ends up, if it's a council farm, either being amalgamated with the neighbours and the house let off separately, or it's sold off. And it's the Clinton estates are very forward thinking, and that's fabulous. But I wonder, as a percentage of national landlords, what percentage are actually thinking the way you're thinking?
So I chaired the estates business group, 28 large estates a few years ago. I'm still a member of it. I sit at the back now and just make strange noises, because the world just goes around, doesn't it? But my impression of my fellow chief executives of large estates is that, you know, they are committed to agriculture and making it work. I think the thing is, back to the county farms thing, or anybody else for that matter, you know, if you're looking at it out of context, you allow the things you just described to happen. If you know, I don't want to be upset too many county councils, the ones on this call accepted, of course, but you know, if you look across the country, county councils have different strategies for county farms. They're revenue, you know, flog them off, make a bit of money, build some houses. Always that thing in the corner, we can't touch it, a bit sensitive, but just don't spend any more money on it, because we've got money to spend on other things, please. So, you know, what is the purpose of the county farm estate? How does it fit with the future? And if there isn't a future for it now, there never will be, with all the stuff, you know, COP26, environment, everything else, you know, let's get real, agricultural act. So I think that opportunity has come, and it's really for the leadership in county councils to really grasp it. God help us. So I really, you know, that's where it needs to come from. And they need to understand that they have a really big opportunity to tick some of the wider boxes about the environment, nature, where your food comes from, local food, bringing more people into the industry, apprenticeships, tick, tick, tick. Surely that must be on the county council's agenda somewhere, please. But it's I've decided at my age, my time of career, now is not the time to start a new campaign. I have enough things going on at the estate. But I think that's what needs to happen. And I'm sure, Sue, that the light bulb will be going on. And just the fact you've got, I've just listed, there might be more on this call, but there's at least 2 people from the County Farms estate who are obviously up there engaging. So, and there's and Graham's doing a strategy for it. So I'm heartened, and I just hope that something will come of it.
Positive. Can I just ask another question? From your, well, what I know, this is the first farm that you've let for a while, and it was just 253 acres, I think, wasn't it? Does Sam and his family work off the farm? And are you able to give an idea of what level of financial backing anybody going into a 253 acre farm would actually need from your point of view as a landlord to give you the confidence that they have got the money to actually successfully farm it?
Claire?
Yeah, so I don't have those figures, and I think it very much depends on the farm and the opportunities within that farm. We knew that Stanty Way at the 264 acres was going to be a part-time holding. So albeit that the main farmer would work elsewhere, and or his partner. Nell is a doctor, she's a GP. I do know though that the farm does make money. They are running in a cash neutral to cash positive position, but we're under no illusion that the other income brought in by Nell helps the family coffers run along. And I think when you're looking at farm scales of that size on a mixed farm like Stantaway, I think landlords need to be realistic, landowners need to be realistic that it is going to be a part-time holding, and we shouldn't be worried about that. And in fact, most of our established holdings are part-time holdings. That there are other enterprises, other jobs that bring money onto those holdings. It's sad, isn't it? You can't fully keep your family going on 264 acres, but we shouldn't be worried about that. And actually, having other sources of income can take the pressure off the intensity of a farming unit, and maybe allow them to explore things that are slightly more exciting. And I know that's definitely the case at Stantaway.
And it's about the rural economy. So, if you've got a vibrant and thriving rural economy, you've got those opportunities for farms to do the double and go back to the 1930s and 40s when agriculture was embedded into the rural economy. And that's what my vision for agriculture, over the past 50 years, agriculture in rural economies has been something seen as not really valuable in terms of GDP, in terms of GVA, sorry, and not adding much, and completely misunderstood by local communities, because most people in local communities the last 50 years have come from other places and all the rest of it. Nothing wrong with that. And I've come from a different place. So it's about how agriculture fits not only in the landscape with other farms, but how it fits into the rural economy, and those synergies and symbiotic relationship really will then drive the economics of agriculture in this new world, in my view. And there used to be something called the Commission for Rural Communities till it was closed down through lack of interest. But the topic, I used to sit on it, that's probably why it's closed down. But it was the thought leadership in there was fascinating about the connectivity of all that. So dust off some of those reports from whenever they were, but there's some interesting stuff around that. So, and with broadband, and with I could go on for ages and pull out sales, say, I'm going to make it completely off message. But the whole thing around broadband and technologies, and COVID, the last 18 months of pandemic has shown that economies can actually thrive in rural areas. In fact, urban economies have moved, economic activity has moved into rural areas because chief executives, people running businesses, or their staff or their workforce have worked effectively from rural areas. I think the agriculture has a massive opportunity to reconnect to rural economies, to reconnect with itself, to work in partnerships, cross catchments. But the whole value chain needs to be in there. The banks, the supermarkets, the people's suppliers, the education side of it, Department of Education, I keep mentioning it. I married, because I knew we were therefore wouldn't get much traction with Department of Education. Last June, I married somebody, a senior civil servant in the Department of Education, purely to deliver this project. I haven't told her that yet, so she's probably hoping the project doesn't get scrapped. So that's what we need to do. Unfortunately, she's in the wrong department, part of Department of Education. She's in schools, but we need to move it into, but I think there's some really big opportunities, and looking at this in a silo is not going to deliver what we need to deliver. And it's just thinking about on a broader context of how we transform this industry, make it exciting, and then your new entrants will flow in through the door, and people will be welcoming them because the risk of new entrants will be lowered. The opportunity will be increased, the general level of innovation, and suddenly we'll be more productive than the French. And that's the only objective I've been setting my objectives by Lord Clinton.
Thanks, John. Does anyone else have any? We've only got a few minutes left now. Has anyone got any final questions or comments they want to make before we close? Graham.
Yeah, John, we met many years ago and you talked about baseline assessments of natural capital, and that really struck home with me. I'm still chasing that from DEFRA for the ELM programme. I'm still not getting anywhere. I wondered how that works in terms of cost for you as a landlord and helping your farmers with that. Does it, because that I think is one of the key questions about whether that can be deployed across all of ELM.
That natural capital assessment, baseline assessments.
Yeah.
Okay. Very briefly then, because time is running out. I also did some work for Network Rail, who are doing a similar thing, and that's fascinating as well. so you can do different levels. So there's enough satellites flying around the world at the moment, the Earth, to be able to do a natural capital baseline assessment of land, including farms, relatively cheaply. And the Oxford University thing, which isn't Oxford University anymore, it's a side shoot, that can be done, will be available shortly online. So you'll be able to just go and put your postcodes in and draw it down for a relatively reasonable cost, I'm told. And we're talking to them about all that now. The other extra, but that just gives you, that gets you a certain level, doesn't it? A certain granularity. To do the real stuff, you need to get somebody out with a spade and start looking at soil sampling and other things. So the work we've been doing with tests and trials with the elms has been with the West Country Rivers Trust and the experts there. And that is being hard graft, but we've got really rich data sets from that. Now that exactly is very costly, very expensive. Same thing, costly and expensive. That, you know, it shouldn't, you know, it's for the average farm, that's something people are thinking about before they do it. So it's like, do you just take the satellite that's flying over and take that data and make some decisions? You can do landscape scale decisions using that, about where you plant trees, where you do this, where you do that. But equally, when you really want to get down to what sort of cropping you need to do and how you should be managing this, you know, where you should be planting certain things, you need to do that real detailed stuff. That is the challenge. But we also need some more soil scientists. That's a different subject.
So
Okay,
Holly has just put her hand up with a question that relates to what you were just talking about, John. So maybe if we take that as the final question, and then we'll look to close. Holly.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So where are you from, Holly?
I'm from Cumbria, near Penrith. And I'm just wondering what your definition of natural capital on farm is.
Okay, that's a really good question. Well, natural capital, say on a farm, is natural capital full stop, really. And and I think you've just hit it on the head, because if we go around talking about things like natural capital and ecosystem services and everything, you draw a blank. And one of the things we learnt, and I'll come back and answer your question in a second, but one of the things we learnt in our ELMS tests and trials is the language we use is really important. If you're going to get farmers, it's not that farmers don't understand stuff, they do, but all these whizzo words from academics, policymakers and people doing stuff needs to be thought about the language we're using. It's basically, it's quite a lot of natural capital assessment is understanding what you've got, and most of that most farmers actually will understand all the key components of natural capital. It's just that they're not necessarily measuring them in the way that needs to be measured. So natural capital includes all those aspects which can have a value put against them. So you can put a value on soil quality, you can put a value on carbon, you can put a value on air quality, you can put a value on sequestration capabilities of trees, of grassland and such like. So it's been able to measure all these elements of land, which are generally not market. There's no market, private market for them. And it's been able to measure these components in a standard way. And the key worry I have about natural capital is for those, everybody on this call is far too young to remember Betamax and VHS. And what we need to ensure is we end up with the VHS, the actual model of assessment, which allows proper trading and value being placed on these natural, inverted commas, capital metrics. So Holly, on the farm in Cumbria, you were looking at similar things to anywhere else, but you'd be looking at the value of what you've got in terms of and once you've measured a baseline of what you've got, you then need to look at what the opportunity to enhance it is. So once you've got that baseline of natural capital, soil quality, carbon, or whatever it is, you then say, well, what is it could be in Cumbria? The particular component is really, you can't be improved, but I'm sure in most cases it can be. Once you've identified how it can be improved, what's it going to cost, what will it be worth in the public money terms when you've done that. And then the third element of natural capital is how you go and make money from it. And that is the big $64,000 question.
Okay, I don't know if thank you for that. And sorry, just to add, could I just ask where sort of natural features like dry stone walls and and things like that come into it?
Yeah, stick those in as well, Holly,
Okay.
because actually natural capital dry stone walls, as things live in dry stone walls, but also they're a feature which has a value. A feature. Why do people come and visit Cumbria? Is it for the sausages, or what is it? They come for the landscape. A lot of people do anyway, and part of the landscape is dry stone walls. So you should be paid for that. I actually believe probably your farm and other farms in upland areas shouldn't be funded by DEFRA. They should be funded by DCMS. But that's a whole different webinar, which I'm happy to contribute to.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Thanks, Holly, for your question. We're going to have to draw things to a close there, but I want to say a big thank you to Claire and to John for a fascinating session. Lots of food for thought that we can take away. Catherine, if you're there, can you remind us who's coming up next?
Yeah, sure. So next week we're actually kind of back in Devon. We have Dan Meek from NSP Southwest. So he works in partnership with Devon County Council, and we've given us some insight on that partnership and how they work with new entrants.
Brilliant. So hope to see many of you at that. But once again, thanks to Claire and John. We'll circulate the recording so others can see it who weren't able to make it today. Thanks very much for everyone attending. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. That's great.